This video is sponsored by Wing Technology, your ultimate flight sim hardware solution.
Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing very well. Today I'm really excited. I have a pilot, not just any pilot, we have Gero, who used to fly for the Luftwaffe and was a Typhoon pilot. Say hello Gero.
Hi John, thank you for having me on your channel again.
Absolutely a delight. And he says again because we've interviewed him before in a different context. He's also the leader of a company called TrueGrit, which are a DCS developer and of course are making the Typhoon in DCS, which is beyond exciting, if there is such a word. And what I will do is link that interview in this video description. You can go and watch that if you want, and it's really good. When we came to the end of that interview, we said we must have you back at some point to talk about your, flying the Typhoon. We've never had a Typhoon pilot on. It's hard to get them on, and it's a really cool plane. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to give you read your synopsis very quickly. I joined the Luftwaffe in 1989 after a standard jet training in Shepherd Air Force Base. I started my fast jet flying career in Wittmund, Jagdgeschwader Richthofen, on the mighty F4F Phantom II. Flew the Phantom for 10 years, which is just another amazing plane. Became a weapons instructor on the Phantom. Converted to Eurofighter Typhoon in 2003 as one of the 10 first pilots trained by the industry. Flew the Typhoon for 15 years as an instructor pilot. Had a small military career in between as squadron commander, ops group commander, and finally base commander, Jagdgeschwader Richthofen, where I retired in 2018. And Gero, being Gero, couldn't just sit and go fishing. He had to make a development company, and now he's making the Typhoon for us, which is great. And one thing I hope to really convey to the valuable viewers and listeners today, Gero, is how cool this plane is, because a lot of America and just other countries around the world kind of see this little European plane and think it's a little cute thing, and when actually in real life it is so friggin' deadly. And don't take my word for it. If you go to an international air show and you actually see the planes flying off against each other, and when the Typhoon comes up, it is just ridiculously kinematically powerful. Gero, obviously, thank you for coming. And as you know by now, the way we do this is rather than me asking you kind of scripted questions where it can get a bit stale and a bit fakish, we let the valued viewers ask all the questions. They are real questions by real people. They may be good, they may be rude, they may be offensive, whatever, but they're real. Anything before we kick off on the questions?
No, I'm very happy that you have this very positive attitude towards the Typhoon. That's good. And your German is also quite good on the Jagdgeschwader.
Well, the only time I get to practice, I haven't spoken German for, I don't know, what's it in 2021, 7 years now? I get 2 chances to practice, Gero. That's when you come on, it's when another German guy that flies with us comes on, and it's when my brother-in-law visits, because he works in Frankfurt. Is it Frankfurt? Is that? Hamburg, sorry, Hamburg, my bad. Yeah, he works for developing medical machines there. Really cool. So I take every chance I can get. Anyway, sorry. Let's do this. Question 1. Regards to Typhoon, which fighters did you compete against? Oh, this is my question. Which fighters did you compete against, and how would you rate the Typhoon kinematically against other airframes? This is probably my most exciting bit. So, well, there's the question. How do you take the question? What's your answer, I guess?
So me, myself, sitting in the aircraft, fighting other aircraft, that would have been, let me think, the F-15, F-16, F-18.
All the big ones.
Probably not much more, because as you just read to the audience, I had also kind of a staff career going on. So the others were more lucky on different airframes. I obviously got the experience from the other guys also, but me, myself, again, in the aircraft, that was, 15, 16, 18. Yeah, probably that's it. Mm-hmm. And kinematically, let's see, the F-15, that was very much fun because it's such a heavy aircraft, Mm-hmm. It has a lot of power, but it's a very big frame. So I had very much fun fighting these guys. We did also BFM close stuff. So also I had one fight where they wanted to have a guns only fight, the manly thing. Mm-hmm. That didn't go well for the F-15, so it was nice.
What was the obvious when you're getting up close and tight with such a different plane like an F-15? What were the differences? Because a lot of people like myself, we're used to flying F-15s, F-18s, and F-16s in simulators, but we've never had anything like this before. front canard delta wing. We've never had anything. What would you say are the major differences in the way they would fly, especially in kind of competitive combat?
Yeah, the airframe, the F-15 is heavy and power wise, in the relationship, it's not as nimble like the Typhoon on that. So the wing load thing, the Typhoon has a very large wing in comparison to the whole airframe, and so for this close stuff, thrust to weight ratio and so on, Typhoon is really very competitive. So that was kind of easy, especially. Obviously, again, all these air combat thing is very dependent on the guy who's sitting in there, and it's also very dependent on what kind of weapons you really want to use. But if you go like against a Typhoon and you say we go guns only, and you do not use, for example, your AIM-9X helmet-mounted sight thing, then I can use the afterburner much more than I would normally use it against such a weapon. Because if you go guns only, then the afterburner is irrelevant, and then the F-15 has no chance on that. Okay, so but if you put the other weapons in there and you have to act on your tactics on the Typhoon differently, then that equals out a little bit other stuff. So it's depending on what kind of fight you're fighting, obviously, and then you put yourself in a corner. So the guy who told me let's go guns only, that wasn't well thought through, let's say. So
Roger. And then what about when you move on to the other a comparable light airframe like an F-16? Are there any?
F-16. F-16 is bad news for us because that depends on the model of the F-16. I always say that the newest F-16s that's flying around with all these conformal tanks and stuff and what they put on the F-16, that's not helping for if you put it again in a situation where you say we go like guns only fight, then that doesn't help because the airframe got heavier and heavier, but the wing stayed the same through the career of the F-16, so that is not helping. If you have an earlier model of the F-16, like the Dutch guys had, for example, then this ratio of what the wing needs to lift around the corners and the engine thrust and stuff, that makes much more sense for this kind of fight. So again, the F-16 is a very formidable platform with all the avionics and all the capabilities the airframe and weapons-wise has. But again, if you put so much stuff on, then you can put a bigger and bigger engine in it. But the wing, if that stays the same with the, I'm not even sure, something like 27 or so square meters versus the 50 square meters from the Typhoon, that, doesn't help. So the F-16, again, it's depending on what kind of model you're fighting, and again, also what kind of fight you're fighting. So that is very important, especially also what kind of pilot is sitting in there and what is his experience.
Roger.
But the F-16 in general is coming close to the Typhoon on that. The F-18, if you were asking next, is a highly capable AOA fighter, let's say, because you can do this lovely AOA overshoot thing, and pretty much like aircraft that do these crowbar type maneuvers where you over AOA the aircraft. That is something the Typhoon cannot do due to the computers. They won't allow it. So that is a move the F-18 can do very good. But then you have a power thing again going on because then the F-18, at least the Charlie models, are not very powerful. Coming to the Echo and Foxtrot versions, the Super Hornets, that's a different thing, but the aircraft is also again heavier. So the F-18 for this kind of fight is also pretty much like an F-15-ish, no real threat on that.
Wow, awesome.
If you can take this, yeah. But the F-16 is, from these three types, let's say the heaviest, not the heaviest, the most potent opponent.
Roger. What's the fly-by-wire limit for the angle of attack on the Typhoon, if you can say?
That's classified.
I knew you were going to say.
No, we would put it out, obviously, in the game version later on. So it's around 24 alphas.
Okay, so that's interesting. We've got 26 in the F-16, about 24 in this. Yeah.
But this is like I said, it's just a number, right?
Yeah.
What you make out of it and what the aircraft makes out of it and what the whole package makes out of it really makes the difference. So you cannot say just because the one aircraft can pull two more alphas, you win the fight or so. That is not how it works in real life.
How interesting. Very interesting. Okay, Giro, that's answered my question really well. And that's given me some hope as well. So what I've got to look out for is low block F-16s. We've got a Block 50. We've got a Block 50, which is kind of, I don't know, a medium weight.
The 50 is medium. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you go lower, like the early, what is it, like 30s or something?
Yeah. Okay. And just for the layman who's listening, what Giro was saying there was the original F16A came out, and it was designed as a purebred, like a purebred horse, all power to weight ratio, designed to win dogfights. And as happens with all planes, it got added more and more weight, more and more capabilities, and bombs, and probably nuclear bombs and stuff like that. And it got heavier and heavier and heavier. But the wings and the frame always stayed the same. So the further back you go in time, the more nimble the fighter was, and that's probably the same with most fighters.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Well, this is something we're going to have to talk about at some point, because we're going to have to put it on red for at some point. Which other fighter can exploit a Typhoon's weak point, if any?
Yeah, I mean, every aircraft has weak points, and every weapon has weak points, and there's for every weapon there's something that counters it, and so that is also like a tactical question, where you analyze beforehand what are your opponents and how do you want to shape the fight on these guys. So it's that question basically opens up the whole world of air-to-air fighting. So that's really tough to answer, because that is dependent on the fighter that is coming on the other side, what the Typhoon's weak point against that system is, if you understand what I mean. Well, so it's not as easy.
That's a really interesting kind of answer you've given there, because what we've started doing, Giro, on our kind of DCS channel, is we've started showing exactly that. We've started a new series showing the strong points and the weak points of all of the fighters in DCS, okay? And what we've realised after about, 10, 20 hours of practice and testing is that exactly what you said, the weak point of your aircraft is completely dependent on the strong point / weak point of your other aircraft. So the only way we could do this series, this is why this is taking months and months and months, is we're having to pit every combination of aircraft A against aircraft B, and then aircraft B against aircraft C, because you can't say I've got a weak point against all of the other planes. That doesn't exist. Exactly like you said. It's really interesting that you brought that out. And so so there is no answer to that. It will have weak points against different planes. Yeah, different weak points.
Exactly. Yeah. And the training of the pilots sitting in these aircraft. That is also the most underestimated thing, and probably as a DCS pilot, the best known thing, because you can have in the same frame someone who sits in there the first time, and then the other guy who has whatever, like 1,000 hours on this, and then it's the same aircraft, but it will have very different outcome probably.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, no, of course. Okay, sorry we couldn't resist this, and we're going to try and stay away from this because we've done a whole 2-hour interview on this already, and we don't want to start repeating ourselves, but relatively briefly, what do you think the Typhoon will bring to DCS in terms of something that's a bit fresh and a bit new?
Yeah, first of all, the first thing, the kind of Typhoon we want to release, and that's what I stated also in the other video, is that we will bring out the air-to-air fighter of it. So meaning we will bring the MRAM also, but for the heat-seeking missiles, it will be the IRST, which is something comparable to, for example, the AIM-9X. That you know from DCS,
yep.
But I think as you will see that the IRST is more capable in a couple of things than the AIM-9X. Then we still plan on, that's not a definite, but we plan on bringing the Meteor also with the first release of the Typhoon. Again, that process is in process, but I'm still positive that we can do this. This missile, for example, will be something like the, from the range-wise, something from it, ideally something like the AIM 54 from the Phoenix, from the Tomcat, something so a longer range definitely than the AMRAAM, so that changes tactics if you pair platforms, and obviously a gun. So that is something that the Typhoon brings initially. Then the later editions will have then the air-to-surface capabilities, which are pretty much known now also through the other platforms. So it will be all laser-guided bomb stuff. The Typhoon concept is not anymore based on anything, on a dump bomb, let's say. So there's no, it will be all GPS laser type stuff. But to be very honest, that is kind of standard, so there's nothing really so new in it. I mean, it is heavily depending on the MITS network. So really fighting Typhoons makes only sense, like with all modern platforms, to have a MIDS network running. I'm very grateful that DCS has or is bringing now the capability of the MIDS in there. So that's very important, I think, for flying the Typhoon and fighting with the Typhoon. That's pretty much it.
Roger. So let's just quickly summarize. So we've got an IR-seeking high off-bore sight missile that's superior, in theory at least, to the AIM-9X, which is amazing because the AIM-9X is, frankly, almost beyond belief. So that's going to be really interesting in the air-to-air war. And our second, usable, playable, fireable long-range missile, because all we've got is one long-range missile. It's AIM-54, which is a heffing great chunker of a thing. And once you know how to defeat it, it's actually quite easy to defeat. So we're bringing a modern long-range missile. Now, that's a huge deal into DCS and a massive game changer. And some people will complain and some people will like it. We all complained when the Phoenix came in because we were all getting shot down at 100 miles. But after a while, you learn how to defeat it and negate it, and the same will be with this. I should just quickly say, for the layman out there, can you very, very quickly, please, just describe what MIDS is, just in kind of layman's terms, please?
It's based pretty much on the Link 16, so it's like the internet or the intranet maybe of fighters communicating to each other and sharing information about other target positions and whatever, and your own position and fuel states of airfields or the other players in there. So you have a good picture of the overall situation because it's a network. So you're part of a network now, and you can see yourself and all the other players that are in this network. And you can share target information on who's doing what in the battle space, let's say. So it's from the battle management aspect, it's a perfect thing to have. You can even be on an alert state in your shelter, sitting there, having the aircraft running on current only, and see what the battle is, how it is to whatever is needed. So that's very handy to have.
Brilliant, Roger. Thank you, Gero. Great answer there. Right, let's push on. What was your favourite feature / system of the the real life Typhoon that it had to offer?
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy. That's how the thrust to weight ratio thing. I mean, it's so powerful and makes really the pilot's heart really smile every time you have a takeoff and you make this like an afterburner takeoff. Normally we even, at least in Germany, we try not to use the reheat, as it is called correctly, not the afterburner, but reheat, because the aircraft is so powerful. You can save some gas and do the takeoff without it. But if you do this, it really goes like a rocket, and that is also, again, like I said in the first question, that helps you in any combat. So that is really something, makes you smile again every time.
Roger, and that's something they could have when they designed the Eurofighter, they could have designed it a little bit, lacking in the kinematic area, like, for instance, the Tornado. Tornado is great in its own way, but kinematically it was, I thought it was pretty poor. And then they kind of reversed it. They came to the Eurofighter and they made it, like a big V8 muscle car, which was great. I'm so glad they did that, because you can whack as many fancy weapons on, but at the end of the day, if you get yourself in an ACM situation, only one thing's really going to win, and that's the ability to turn quickly and climb quickly.
It's always good to have. Always good to have.
Yep, excellent. Okay, next. I know there have been several nicknames for the F4, but Luftverteidigungsdiesel, no idea what
you said it good. Yeah.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
That is a completely made up, not existing really word, but it means diesel is diesel in the end, right? So the fuel, the diesel, gasoline, and Luftverteidigung means the air. So like something like that air defense diesel. It's like the air defense diesel thing.
Okay.
So
yeah, I get it.
It is like the German F4s, right? How they smoked.
Yeah.
Because they turned down the engines for more lifetime, and they turned down the temperature of it, so they had this big smoke going on, the ugly brownish diesel.
Greta didn't like it, but I liked it. Okay, what was your favourite general F4 nickname? And brackets, if your plane had one, what was the special nickname you gave your plane? So the F4.
Yeah, to be honest, for me it was always the Phantom. I mean, it's no big deal. I had no special one of it. Some call it the Rhino. Rhino is also a very known nickname for the F4, coming more from the States. But a German nickname, well, for us in Wittmund, it was more like always a Phantom.
Roger. We had the F4. It was kind of before my time. Auntie, did we have any nicknames for it?
Smoky Joe.
Smoky Joe.
At Coningsby.
Smoky Joe. Brilliant.
That makes sense.
I didn't know that. Well done. All right, very good. What were the differences between flying in the US and in Germany?
Well, that again depends on what kind of flying. I mean, I did my flight training in Shepherd, obviously, but this is flying in a school, a very closed environment, very regulated for being a stupid beginner pilot. So that it's not like flying around free like you could do this. And then on the other hand, flying, for example, on red flag, but red flag by itself is also very regulated in airspaces. So I'm not very used to be, for example, like a regular squadron pilot in whatever Luke Air Force Base or so, and you can do maybe a broader thing. So the difference, let's say now, besides the weather stuff, and that is also depending on where in the US you fly, obviously. But in Germany, the airspace is obviously also very crowded. Before Corona, a lot of air traffic was going on, so that it has always been a space issue. Not space and space, but having space enough for your areas to be able to fight. And that is normally in the US, again, depending on where in the US, but that's normally different. We had the big luxury in Wittmund that we have the North Sea up to the Dutch areas and up to Coningsby and so on. So the whole sea areas were very nice to use. Big luxury, especially if you fight with the Typhoon with the longer range weapons. But yeah, the difference is that the German airspace is like a European airspace, very regulated on these, and it's not as, let's say, free flying around in the US. But again, that depends on in different parts of the US. It's also very tight airspace. So
okay. We've had we've interviewed several German, French, English or UK pilots now, and we ask this question a lot. And often the main thing they come back is that our a slightly different question, but our local air forces, so our European air forces, are kind of very small and kind of purpose. I can't think of the word. It annoys me, but more. Just the way they operate is very small, whereas the Americans is so big that it operates in a completely different way. And I don't just mean geographically, but the kind of whole feel and structure of the Air Force. Is that something you noticed, or were you not in kind of that deep?
Yeah, depends. So red flag exercises are so great airspace, great what you can do, but that's just the airspace, right? I mean, you can't do this all other places in the US. So yeah, you can do good stuff in Germany and training wise. That's okay, but we wouldn't go to other states if that would not be the case, that the other airspaces are better. So you go to the States for training because it is a good training and good airspaces. So it has reasons. It makes sense.
Okay. Right. Nice easy one. What did you prefer flying? Phantom or Typhoon? And why?
It's also a tough one. I couldn't even say. I mean, the Typhoon is the modern one, and if you want to go to a conflict situation today, you want to sit in a Typhoon and not in an F4. But flying from the fun perspective, the F4 was also great. I mean, it was a very manly aircraft.
Yes, it was.
So it was great. I mean, I had even F16 guys that were really, envious on me flying the F4 and said, well, I would have loved to get the F4. And I'm like, well, the F16 looks great to me too, right? So, but the F4 is really a cult aircraft. It's like very manly. It's a thing. It's a machine. And it's made for war. It's a war machine. Getting bullets in there doesn't hurt much. Typhoon is a modern race car, and you win races with it. And it's a completely different mindset, let's say, in sitting in this kind of aircraft. And it is much fun with the thrust to weight thing and having the MITS network and being able to have a very good situational awareness. So yeah, Typhoon makes much more sense, but I would love to fly the F4 once again, maybe, just for fun.
Roger, yeah. So Typhoon, if you're actually going to go and do something and you want to live. F4, if you just want to have a bit of a blast around. Okay.
If you have your old timer on your garage sitting, then you would love to drive your old timer, right?
Yeah.
Just even if modern electric car or something.
Absolutely. Right. Can you give any detail as to the future role of the Typhoon in the Luftwaffe with other operators, assuming integration with NATO forces operating the F-35? The F-35 can sneak around with its stealth. What role will the kind of non-stealthy Typhoon fill that the F-35 can't? Great question there.
Yeah, but also kind of classified stuff going on there. So,
yeah, fair enough.
Well, the role in Germany, I can say at least, has been with the Typhoon initially just a pure air role, but then that changed over time, and it is now the true multi-role from the idea. So that is what all the others pretty much planning too. I think the Italians are also more like the air guys initially and concentrated on something different. But for every Air Force, it is, at least currently in this time, it's good to have a platform that can do everything because it's cost effective. It makes sense to have not a big fleet mix of many different platforms. I think only the United States really can afford this kind of level. So for all the European Air Forces, makes sense to have a platform that can do pretty much all that is going on. And if it comes to stealth and all these capabilities, obviously the Typhoon is, like you can see from the shape, not built like this, like in F-35 or F-22, but it has different ideas of, still be capable to oppose that threat. But again, that's pretty much like we said in the beginning. It is very depending on what is your type of threat, what's your scenario, what's your role in this, and you need to shape that battle and make your system work. And that can be very different.
Right.
Each time.
Absolutely. I mean, exactly. I mean, yes, a stealth fighter bomber is going to be really useful if you go to war with Russia or China. That's highly unlikely. Whereas a kind of campaign like in Afghanistan, you're not going to need stealth planes, which is the more likely conflict. Typhoons are going to be cheaper and more suitable, right? In reality.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. If you go for whatever, if there's a conflict like you have a nation that has, let's say, like the F-16 in the early block stages, which is not so capable if you compare it to an F-35. But if your ROEs demand that you have to VID this guy and you go into a close fight, then probably the F-35 is not the best choice to have there in this kind of situation. So again, depends on what's the fight you're taking on.
Really good point there. Really good point. And we're not going to get into the whole stealth debate, but exactly, it's a really good point. I'll take that up at another point. Okay, very good. 9. What is the longest mission you've ever flown, and what were its objectives?
Since I have never been in a real combat situation, and I'm not saying unfortunately, that should be normal that it is fortunate that you're not in this kind of situation, but so the longest missions I've flown are the ferry missions, air-to-air refueling to the States or to India, for example. So the longest one is something like 8-9 hours. So yeah, but this is really a ferry type situation, right, doing air refueling all the time. So, and combat training combat missions, let's say, where you really do air combat in between and not ferry just from A to B. Let's say like 3, close to 4 hours maybe. That's pretty much.
I feel for you doing a ferry like that. We recently, just a couple of days ago, did a 2,500-mile mission. Most of it is just ferry, and it took like 4 hours, and by the end of it, I was suicidal. I was so fed up by the end of it. I just didn't want to fly anymore. So you doing a 9-hour mission in an actual uncomfortable, little cockpit. So that's why that's the not so fun side of being a fighter pilot, I suppose, but that's the real side. Very good.
And it's also very much on the airframe. The F4, for example, had a terrible ejection seat ergonomics, let's say. You're sitting very upright and not comfortable. I mean, no ejection seat is really comfortable, but even compared to a Typhoon with his seat, tilted back, not as much as an F-16, but still, it's a very comfortable cockpit to do this kind. Yeah? But on the other hand, in Typhoon, you're sitting alone in the aircraft, and that is a threat. If you do this long missions, I mean, especially ferry flights and stuff, people fall asleep in this.
Right.
Yeah? So that can be a problem. So it's always also interesting what kind of frame you're sitting, how you cope with these kind of situations long time.
Really good point there. And again, one thing we found, I mean, we were just, it's just a bit of fun for us at the end of the day. You can't die in DCS. But by the end of 4 hours, as if anyone goes to watch that movie, I don't know where they would, but if anyone did, everyone was really struggling to fly. Landings became difficult, even though they're normally really easy, because we were so fidgety and fed up and fatigued by then. I can imagine, and that must be a really interesting point of modern fighter design, that you're basing it around a human who is incredibly fatigable and fallible, and you have to find ways to keep them as rested as possible, I suppose.
And hydrated. People always forget to drink, for example. I had a mission that took more than 3 hours, and I completely had no water with me. That was at red flag, by the way. Temperatures are high in an F4. And the F4 didn't have a good, climate control system there. And after going to the 3rd hour, I developed such a big headache due to the dehydration issue. I was really close to not be able to fly the aircraft anymore. So
wow.
Less than even fighting it, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's things like that you hear that you only get from real pilots. That's interesting. Right. Okay, very good. Let's push on. I have read that the voice control system of the F-35 is rarely used because it does not work well in high G environments, heavy breathing, altered sound due to stress. Does this also apply to the one in the Typhoon? How good does or did it work?
Yeah, that is a very interesting chapter. I think the Typhoon was the very first aircraft that introduced this kind, at least I think. I have no idea how the F-35 ones work now, but I can say, I think I can say without, touching classified stuff here, but that voice control system from the beginning didn't work at all. I mean, the problem was that you had to make it your own file. You were sitting in front of a PC in the squadron and did more than a day of training your voice, basically your voice file. You took that with the thing you take with you in the aircraft and you tell them it's me. You had also your voice file so that you can be recognized by the system, but the recognition was really terrible. So in my career of the 15 years flying that aircraft, I basically never used it because it was getting better over time. That is true. And nowadays it's on a level that it makes kind of sense. But the learning curve was really slow on that system, and the usability also is overestimated, let's say, because there are so many. I mean, it is in a single-seat aircraft where you need to concentrate and battle manage a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of information in the Typhoon going on. It is one thing that the aircraft talks to you a lot. I mean, other people talk to you, systems talk to you, the aircraft talks to you, and then you have to talk to the aircraft also to do maybe kind of basic functions. That doesn't make much sense instead of pressing a button, because that it would be more quiet. Because it is very dependent also in this kind of situations you would use it. If you would imagine something like flying in a close formation thing, traveling from A to B again, and you're in clouds or at night, then it would be very helpful to have the system to set up, for example, your squawk or change the radio channel or something. You can tell the aircraft via the button press and then speak into it, and it does maybe where you need 2 or 3 button presses. That is very helpful because you're glued to the outside and you're not looking into the aircraft and have no time and capability to reach somewhere else because you're concentrated on flying close formation, for example. That makes sense.
Roger, absolutely.
It's very rarely done.
Right. We can draw a comparison in our simulator as well. We have exactly this. Well, not exactly. We have the same idea. We have a voice thing as well in DCS. And the problem we found is that you again teach it. You sit there saying words and you teach it, and it's obviously much more modern than the one that you would have used back, back then. But even so, the problem is that you just can't help is that when you do go into real combat and you actually need it because a fighter appears or something, your voice changes. It gets higher pitch. As you get more excited and quicker, and it can't understand you anymore, and you just get more and more frustrated.
you're heavily breathing. You get this pressure breathing through your mask, which really, puts air rushing through this, and it's completely different. And talking under 9G is very different. So that's why I had to laugh, because people were sitting then in front of the PC and try to mimic that.
Right.
Sitting there on the chair and, do like the terms was like, and that really was so funny to see. And it didn't work also, because then the problem was, if you didn't do this like this, if you weren't under 9G and wanted to have something, that didn't recognize you either. So it's not like the iPhone or something with Siri or whatever that recognizes everyone and every time. Pretty much. It's much worse than that. So
well, it was a valiant effort, and they started it off, but and it's amazing how many technologies come from aerospace. I was just doing a video recently on how many, almost everything that's cool in the world has come from aerospace. It's amazing when you kind of get to the bottom of it. All right, okay, thank you, Giro. So the German Constitutional Court banned... Let me try this again. So the German Constitutional Court banned shooting down passenger aircraft if they were captured by terrorists and were to be used as a weapon of terror attack. What do you think about that? So I didn't realise this was a thing. But so is it saying that if there was a 9/11 situation, you wouldn't be able to shoot down the aeroplane? Is that what we're about?
That's what this topic is touching at, right? I normally do, even in my former career, as we met people in still before Corona, I did some lectures or seminars about this topic. That's quite interesting. It's not as easy as it looks, but in general, it's correct that we're in Germany, very different again, like the other countries around us, and take these things with a different approach, let's say. So there are methods of that you can do this, but it's very dependent on the situation again. So not to really give this too much away and to put too much ideas into minds of possible bad guys here. But it is in Germany, it's more complicated to get to this point to be able to do this. In different countries, if you go across border with it, I mean, if you have an airliner that crosses through Europe, like whatever, 5 countries, and you have QRAs joining the aircraft all the way. If you come to a different country than Germany, you probably have a quicker situation where it could be shut down, let's say.
Roger. Yeah, fair enough. It's a very difficult lose-lose situation, I don't think. Okay, question 12 is a multi-part from Hoggy Sucks, and he gives us really good questions. But what I'm going to do is skip over that one for now and get some other people's done, and then we'll come back to that if we have time. Because I don't want to do the whole interview just on one guy's question. It would be a bit unfair. So if I skip down to 14 and we'll come back. Hang on. No, sorry. 12. We do have 12. Any thoughts you'd like to share on the transition in mindset between piloting between F4 and Typhoon? I imagine one would develop certain mindset while piloting a particular aircraft, though flight combat principles may remain the same when transitioning. What other paradigm shifts, if any, that the Typhoon brought to the table? Thank you and take care. So that's question 12, Giro.
It's a long one. I need to reread it. So the question is, when you're transitioning from an F4 to a Typhoon, what's the difference in mindset? Okay. Yeah, I mean, they're completely different aircraft from how you operate them, but they're still aircraft. So we had weapons systems officers on the F4 who were, before we started introducing the Typhoon to the German Luftwaffe, they said, hey, you know what? The aircraft seems to fly so easy. You don't need a pilot in it. You need a battle manager, and that's like the weapon system officer. So let's convert weapon system officers to the Typhoon, because the aircraft, does its thing flying, but you need a Viso in there. And we're like, okay, that's maybe your opinion, but it's still an aircraft, and you have to have situational awareness trained in. If you go in a combat situation, maneuver the aircraft in a 3D environment correctly, and all this. So the basic skills of operating a fighter aircraft are the same. That's not depending on the frame. It is different how you operate the frame, but the basic understanding on 3D and geometrics and whatever. So that is all the same. The aircraft operates obviously different, and you have different tools in there, and how you can do this. but you still need a pilot to fly it, really. I mean, and a good pilot to have a good result. So it also doesn't equal out that you're a shitty pilot and you still have a very positive outcome. That is still not true. You have to be a good pilot and have good understanding on how battle shapes and how you use your systems and stuff. So that remains all the same, not really depending on the platform. You need to understand your platform completely to operate it perfectly to the capabilities of the platform. But that's what you need to do. And from the F4, like I said, it's a very manly aircraft. It had a reason why there are two people in there, because the pilot was, depending on the situation, very much flying the aircraft. So making it doing what you needed to do in the combat situation, not to stall it, be fast enough, use the energy correctly, because there's no so much in comparison. So that needed really a pilot, and it needed a weapon system officer at times to, still have the second brain there to see the overall picture, be defensive on the mindset, looking to your back and managing the combat situation. In the Typhoon now you're in a single seat aircraft, so you do this all on your own, and the hope and the idea of the Typhoon is that the computer takes over all the visual functions, and that is mostly true, but systems can be jammed or disturbed, or they can shut down. Hopefully a visual doesn't shut down in flight like the computer sometimes does, but so it's again a different thing. You're more a battle manager in the Typhoon. If everything goes well, you have so much information. The Typhoon flying and fighting is really battle management. It's information management. There's so many information in the Typhoon at hand that you can use them to your benefit, but they can also completely confuse you and misguide you, let's say, because if you're not focusing on the correct information that you need to find out between all these information. So Typhoon handling and fighting is really, really knowing the system, because you're alone there and it gives you a lot of information. So you need to filter and make an information management thing there. Flying the aircraft itself, you could say, well, it flies so easily. And it's probably, if you will see it on DCS, it is a very easily flown aircraft. I mean, if you take off, you erase your gear, that's it. There's no flaps, slats, wings, whatever to do. You just raise the gear and the computer does the rest. Outer trims, it's very easily handleable. But that's for a reason, because you're immediately overwhelmed with information handling. And if you then go with your information rich cockpit and displays and helmet sights and all, you go into in a combat situation, then it would be very helpful that you know what the focus is right now, because you can have like 3-4 TD boxes in the head-up display and your helmet side, and then you don't even maybe know where to look at because you maybe missed a cue here. So that is very different. The F4 was very let's say easy in type of you didn't have much information. You needed, as a pilot, you need to fly the aircraft. In the Typhoon, you need to fly the information. You need to handle and manage the information. That's pretty much the biggest difference there.
Roger Garo, excellent answer there. We're going to skip down to 14 now, and then we'll come back to Hoggett's question. So 14, relatively easy one from your kind of personal experience. What was the scariest moment you had in your flying career? So not just in the Typhoon, but everyone's had a bit of an oopsie at some point, however good you are.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it doesn't maybe have the reason that you're not good. Maybe somebody else is not as good, and you have a definite oopsie. So yeah, I'm very lucky that I didn't have a killing oopsie. That is something after leaving the Air Force is something you can really look back and say, hey, I survived it, because I really don't think that's a joke, but that's something that not everybody was so lucky with. So there were in all these combat situations where you practiced ACM stuff, BFM stuff, there were always kind of scary situations where you thought, wow, I misjudged that, or the other guy misjudged it completely. So there are a lot of situations. On the F4 side, for example, I have like 2 things that I really was very close in. That was something, I'm not sure if you ever have done this. Actually, I've never seen that on DCS side. We called it a 1v many, 1 versus many exercise. So, for example, at least at Wittmund, at the times of the F4, we had in the beginning, like in the 90s, there was a big focus on really BFM type gunfight stuff, the Richthofen type, So, and then especially on Fridays, for example, or deployed to Decima Manu on this ACMI side, you would take 6, even up to 8 aircraft into the area, and everyone was against everyone. So it's a one versus many, meaning everyone. There's no like 2v2 blue versus red. It's like blue versus green versus yellow versus. So everyone, many 8 aircraft. So you can imagine if you do this, you need to really be looking out the window and not, crashing into the other aircraft and fighting and shooting down the other guy. Then they go to an area, revive, and come back. Looking backwards, I'm really surprised that we survived this phase, mostly. And there were very, scary situations, obviously, coming out of this, because you couldn't keep 8 aircraft at all times, or 7 other inside, for example. So there were scary situations. As I was a very young instructor pilot on the F4, I had a student who tried to kill me on final with the F4 and the sleds situation. We trained also flying without the sleds. If they failed, locked in basically, then you had a different AOA situation going on, and you needed to train that. And in one situation on short final with about something like 200-300 feet above the ground, gear down, close to be landing, he out of a sudden pulled at the stick and immediately stalled the aircraft, and we flipped over inverted.
Wow.
And with the gear down in the F4 Phantom, not so much a nimble aircraft, looking, through the cockpit now out of sudden really to the ground. That was a kind of scary situation. We really recovered this very closely to the ground with the afterburner going. Me in the backseat recovering the aircraft. So that was kind of scary.
Wow.
Yeah, but for an instructor pilot, these situations do arise. So, okay. And in the Typhoon, actually, also ACMs. ACM is always the closest situation that you can come to mid-air situations.
Roger.
Yeah.
I've heard the last pilot I interviewed, we were talking about ACM, and one thing that really struck us that we'd never thought about in DCS, it said you train ACM to actively avoid hitting each other. I know it sounds obvious, but in DCS, you don't care if you hit the other guy. Again, you don't really die. All you care about is gunning them and getting the kill. You never think about, I've got to also do this move so that I purposefully don't put myself so that we can hit each other. And it was something that kind of really struck home about one of the differences between real combat, how they train, and a simulator where it doesn't really matter if you die, if you hit each other. So that was just something really interesting.
That's really focusing very much on the difference in mindset between flying, in a DCS type of environment or sitting with your own life in this kind of aircraft for real. Because that makes a difference.
Yeah, and you can't. Yeah, sorry, go
you
ahead.
hit yourself once, that's it.
Yeah, and you can't fake it. And a simulator is a simulator. At the end of the day, real life is real life. There's no. So that was really interesting. I found that.
Imagine you would train on DCS, and you would say, or you fly DCS, and you would say, if I crash once, if I die once in DCS,
that's it.
I will never switch it on again. Never.
Right, and no one's going to do that.
Probably not, and people would really then start flying differently.
Yeah, but that would become that would become too hard. I would not enjoy that, Giro.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right, 15. Which part of the cockpit will we enjoy most in the DCS when it comes out? Are there any weird, unique, fancy gizmos in the cockpit that we're not used to in, say, other planes? Interesting.
Yeah, this is interesting. Obviously, it has the 3 MHDDs, so the multifunction head-down displays, so the whatever they call it in the other aircraft, so the 3 big TV things. You can configure them like you want, basically. You can, swap from left to right or middle position. You can customize that. There's a lot of information going on, like I said. You can clutter and declutter the information, so that will be initially, I would say, kind of overwhelming because it's colored. It's a lot of symbols, millions of symbols, different meanings. So that is kind of confusing initially, but if you're starting to get comfortable, it feels also comfortable. I think it's a pretty clean cockpit, because if you compare it to the like an F14 or something with all these dials and stuff, it's more like an F16, but even less switches in there. So the whole switchology idea of the Typhoon is also very straightforward. Most of the switches have the logic of being, switched on in the beginning once, and then you pretty much don't need them anymore until switching it off. So that's sounds normal, but you don't touch many of these switches in flight. You have something, it's called a gang bar, for example. From the battery side, I'm even not sure, it's like 6-7 switches, for example, and you take a gang bar and pull this, and you switch them all simultaneously on, for example. You have 2 of these gang bars. It's because for a QAA scramble situation, you don't want to switch millions of switches individually, so you have this gang bar stuff. Yeah. Something that is probably not so known is you have these backup instruments on the right-hand side of the glare shield, and they are hidden. You have a flap that can open, and to reveal these, right? They are backup instruments. If you see pictures from the Eurofighter normally, or the Typhoon that is normally hidden, you can switch it open.
Where is that roughly? I'm looking at a replica cockpit now. On the right-hand side.
Glare shield right side.
Oh, I see.
To the frame.
Yeah.
And that's if it is closed, there's the information of your IFF channels and stuff, information on there, and TACAN channels and so on. That's which is on the right-hand side in vertical 3 columns. And if you then open up that flap, then below that is like 3 main backup instruments.
Right. Very interesting. So this is like the last step before the F-22 Raptor when you went purely to screens. That is just screens and kind of a battery on and a generator on switch, and that's it. So this has got.
But these backup instruments are also screens.
Oh, they're screens as well.
Yeah. If the electrics go, it's dead as a. Yeah.
Well, amazing.
There's no whiskey compass in it.
Yeah.
That is the first aircraft I've flown where not a standard whiskey compass is installed. And there's nothing. If your power goes down, the aircraft is dead.
All right. Well, that's technological advancement, I suppose. Okay. Very good. Okay. Let's carry on. 16. Germany shares borders with many countries and is surrounded on all sides. How does this affect the role of the Luftwaffe and its responsibilities in comparison to, say, the UK, which is an island?
Yeah, but the UK is, if you think airspace-wise, it's also not an island.
That's
because
what I thought,
they're touching everybody else, right? Especially interesting airspaces to up north and then over to Russia and stuff. So everybody is touching the other one somehow. There's no real island in airspace, and the responsibilities are all the same. Yeah, and obviously. It's different now than we have like in the 80s with the Warsaw Pact thing going through Germany here. That was completely different, obviously, and the importance also of that airspace, and the no-fly zone close to the Soviet Union borders and stuff. That was different, obviously.
We should probably explain that. So back in quote unquote the good old days, obviously you'd have the Iron Curtain, which was pretty much right next to you. It was right through your country, in fact, wasn't it? Yeah. And he said so Giro was right on the edge of the boundary, and this defines the kind of NATO side thing. And at any point, the doctrine was tanks and flankers might fly over from Soviet Russia, and those guys and Giro and that had to be on maybe a bit before, but had to be on QRA alert. So that defined back then everything about your Air Force and but things have changed obviously after the Iron Curtain came down.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Are you aware of how Germany overcame the considerable differences between East and West Air Forces after the reunification of the country, e.g. personnel, equipment and doctrine?
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, I've been, let's say, part of it because in Wittmund, I started flying in Wittmann 93. So that was pretty much the time frame when we took over let's say, some of the East German pilots, and did this reunification also with the armies. And at least I can say this now, my knowledge about taking the former opponent pilots into your own air force, that was an interesting process. Like the whole unification process is up to even now interesting how it was done and handled. Not many pilots made it over, let's say, to the Western Air Force part. There were a lot of them were vetted out, or whatever you would say, through the political, questions. If they could be taken over and how their mindset was, or however you want to say this in English. So not many pilots were taken over, and the pilots we took over also to Wittmann, we had a couple. They had a completely different training doctrine in the East German part, and even flying the MiG-21, 23s, or also MiG-29 guys, they trained completely different than the Western forces, and not to a good part. I mean, it was a very strict training. It was very constructed or something. They stuck very much to rule books on how to do air combat. Air combat was never as flexible as we trained it on the Western side. So if you went into a combat situation with these guys, it would have been very interesting. I'm very happy that it never happened, but it would have been very interesting if we would have really met in anger. Because after we saw these guys coming over, it was like, man, what kind of training did they do? It was not good. It was really not good training. And obviously we retrained these guys with some success, obviously, and maybe also not. So very different, again, depending on the person we trained. But from the let's say, like, 0 point taking these guys over, we were really surprised on how bad they were trained. And I think that is something I can say and I can evaluate really. That shouldn't sound cocky now, but there wouldn't have been any match in the combat situation, and because the training was so completely different, and depending on let's say, like a GCI situation, and monitoring them and directing them, very different training.
Sure.
Very interesting.
That is a very interesting, and I think that's going. In my opinion, my feeble opinion, that shares its way not just in the air forces, but in the ground forces and whatnot as well. But just joining on to that, of the East Germans that were joined to you, were there any tangible benefits?
By benefits that they joined, of course. It's always a benefit if you have diversity. It's always good to have different perspectives and ideas, and so it's always a benefit. And it's a question of, even having the information of how the other guys trained and what are their objectives and so on is a valuable and a very valid information, and so you can reshape your thinking and tactics and whatever. So it's always a big benefit.
Roger. And getting slightly political for a moment, Germany has occasionally been criticised by other NATO member states for spending a lower percentage of its GDP on military, so giving less money to its military. In your opinion, has this had a detrimental effect on capability, size and general effectiveness of Germany's air force in comparison to the other NATO countries?
Yes.
You give them less money, they can't buy as many planes, they can't train as many pilots. Yeah. End of it.
It's a very simple answer, because it's all depending on what are your objectives, right? And Germany's objectives, let's say, politically, are different than others, and that's how we had a history that forced this situation for a good reason. So, but on the other hand, then with the Bundeswehr starting, that was in former times. Let's say the Bundeswehr itself was with the, like we said here, with the Warsaw Pact thing and the Iron Curtain situation. So the Bundeswehr was very much focused on this kind of fight, obviously, and very capable. And after that, falling down, and the main objectives of what the Air Force or the Bundeswehr itself and with the Luftwaffe, what they can do, and what are the objectives of the whole military, that very much changed. I mean, at least in Germany, for quite some time, politicians thought the enemy has gone, whoever was really the enemy, and but that was gone. So no big reason for to have a Bundeswehr, because Bundeswehr means like something you defend your country, right? And then we started to do a lot of deployment to Afghanistan and whatever countries. So that changed, obviously, the whole setting and lineup and equipment and everything, doctrine of your training and equipment. And that has, if we would say, not so much benefits on other stuff, if you think of like defending your country, because you have only so much money. And if you then put not much money in it, because you think of like, well, maybe we don't need it so much, this military thing, and you don't put as much money as you should have, then you probably have not so good a capability of doing things you should do. So that has always been a problem. And at least my career, my 30 years in the Luftwaffe, has pretty much always been something of improvising with your stuff. And I think we did a good job with it, and with the equipment we've been given. Also, like the F4 Phantom, in its capabilities, was starting to lag more and more behind as more modern weapon systems came into play. And when we were at a red flag, like in the 90s, we were still okay, but going more and more through the years, then the other air forces said, well, you don't need to participate anymore because you're not link capable, and your capabilities are really lagging now. And I wouldn't say I was ashamed, but it's like, well, I could do so much more if I would have a better equipment, right? So yeah, that had an impact, obviously. But I think it was always a good German thing, improvising stuff, and we made the best out of it. But that's still what we do today. I mean, it's still not really so funded like it should be, if you're thinking from a military perspective, obviously. So it's still a problem.
Roger. Yeah, we're having our own problems for all the same reasons, but yeah, okay. I believe we've touched on this, but I believe Germany has chosen to invest further in the development of the Typhoon in preference to the F-35 and/or Super Hornet. Are you aware of the reason?
Yeah, so that is still a process going on. The F-35 decision that has been done. So yeah, the Eurofighter will. At least for now, what I know is that the F-35 will not be a part of the German Luftwaffe for now. On the Super Hornet side, I think that's still under discussion. I would say I know that. Let's say like main parts of the Air Force would see the benefit in having a Super Hornet in the fleet mix, and not a pure Typhoon force, let's say. And there are good reasons and bad reasons why that should be this case. But yeah, the F-35, that is definitely not part of it. And well, the reason for it, that is much, I think, politics, right? I mean, there are military reasons for decisions, obviously, but it's also politics. And so if you would take in consideration what I would have, bought as a standard line pilot, and what kind of equipment, so probably that would have been different from what we really got sometimes. Right, and so that decision for not taking the F-35 and staying on the Eurofighter, yeah, it's also a situation of where you want to be able to control your vital equipment, right? I mean, the F-35 would have been for us also like the MRAM, for example, as we took it over to the F-4, it would have been mostly a black box for us. Probably. Yeah, so not being really able to change things, get the real data that is the interesting data on the F-35 is much more even than a Eurofighter a battle information management system, right? But you need, if you are not able to handle this information and change it and manipulate it and gather it on your way like you want to do it, and if this all is like a black box to you and you're dependent on the other country to deliver or not deliver the stuff, then that is probably something that is worthwhile thinking over, if that is something you want to do.
Okay. we move from real life back into absolute fantasy. So just imagine fantasies. Any country, any time in history. Is there one aircraft that you would really like to fly, and what is it? Fantasy aircraft.
A fantasy aircraft. I mean, I would love to fly a Tomcat.
Oh yeah, that's a great choice.
I love the Tomcat, right? But I wouldn't go to Iran or something to fly.
No. Is there any particular reason? Just because it's that place in your heart that it's, or is there a specific manual reason why you'd want to fly the Tomcat?
I just love it. I think it's the optics of the aircraft. I mean, that is so amazing. It looks so great. And I grew up with the time of the Tomcat. I mean, even prior to Top Gun, that Kirk Douglas movie on what's that in English? The Final Countdown, I think it is.
Oh yeah, 1980. Yeah.
So these were the movies. I mean, I grew up with basically, and the F-14. I just love it. Like it looks, and that's also a very manly aircraft, and these sweep wing things there. So just love it.
Roger, absolutely. No one's going to criticize you for that. Okay. Why do you think medium or long range IR air-to-air missiles are not more popular? We had a Rafale pilot on here, and obviously they have the Mika IR and stuff like that, and he was very big on that. He had only good things to say about it, but then again, he's a bit biased. Do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, I would agree with him. He's for a good reason biased on that. I'm also kind of unsure. Again, I mean, that touches now a lot of classified stuff, but there is, I think, something missing in our inventory where we could have a good use case on that. Again, it's also depending on what kind of rules of engagement you're having and if you could employ these kind of missiles into what kind of situation. But I think I think there is something missing in our. I would prefer to have such a capability also for some reasons. I mean, again, there is if you shape your mix on your aircraft, your loadout, that you do this to each mission tailored to the mission. And some missions we would fly, maybe you would have a good reason to have such a long range IR capability, and we don't have it. So.
Roger.
Yeah, I completely agree with the guy.
Stripping it right back to basics, kind of. I think even kind of mid-90s. United States versus Russia, and Russia would have, even then I think they had medium range IR guided missiles. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think, but nothing ever appeared on the other side. Nothing appeared on the American side, and it always surprised me. And I always wondered if these IR missiles were actually in real life no good, and the Americans knew. Or I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? But I guess it's above our pay grade to know, isn't it?
I mean, in the initial red flag scenarios that I mentioned earlier in the Phantom, the most kills, let's say, we got on our side were done by exactly that, long range IR missiles, because no one trained with it, because you didn't have them in your own stock. So you weren't so much aware that they are around and they're capable for certain situations, and you were not alert enough for your triple ACT stuff and how to or when to, for example, employ flares, because you thought it's not a flare situation. I need to use them here, and but it had been, and you were killed because you didn't think of them. So they're bad news, and again, it's depending on the situation. Sometimes they're useless. But sometimes they're not. And again, we got the most kills on our side through these missiles.
Very interesting. And that transfers wonderfully over to DCS again. So if we take ourselves into one of the public servers, okay, that represents as best kind of a free market of fighting, no particular biases. And the easiest way to get a kill in one of those is you grab yourself a Russian plane with a medium range IR missile, you skulk around in the mountains, and you just send an IR missile out, and it invariably hits. And that's because 95% of the players in there fly Hornets and F-16s and maybe a Tomcat. They don't fly any Russian stuff, and they're not aware of these missiles, how to see them, how to counter them. And it, like I said, it invariably hits them because they're listening for radio missiles and stuff like that. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have also now more modern systems that can counter. You have missile warning equipment. You have active missile jamming stuff. Also where you can jam the IR seeker of an IR missile. So technology goes on. So the benefit of such a kind of a weapon system might degrade again over time because different aspects are coming into play now.
Yeah, very interesting.
In what kind of time frame you're living there.
Okay, fine. The next one, I'm going to change it a tiny bit. Let's go into a little bit of fantasy land, and let's say that you, in your Typhoon, have had to have a guns fight with an F-22 Raptor, shall we say? Would you feel like? Do you think, if you predicted this, would you feel like you were missing thrust vectoring, or would you say that the Typhoon, due to various reasons, didn't really need it in such a fight?
Yeah, that's also like a 50-50 answer. For most of the fights we didn't miss it. As I said in the beginning, have not the luxury of, for example, fighting the flanker with the thrust vector versions like the British had a lot, going against, for example, Indian in training and so. So the experiences with going against, or also like we had German fighters in the Red Flag going against F-22s, we did, and also in the UK. Unfortunately not me myself, but the others, and these fights were interesting. It's not so that also during these BFM situations the Typhoon always lost against an F-22, not at all. So it's also a question, like we said before, on how you try to shape the fight. I mean, if you know you're going against such an opponent, you initially shape the fight in a different way to avoid, like the question above there was, you avoid your deficits, hopefully. Obviously, the other guy wants to try to benefit from his stuff, so that is the fight that is going on, to maximize your capabilities. So yes, I mean, on the other hand, I would always like to have more capabilities. So thrust vectoring is a capability, and I would just love to have it. But if there is limited money and stuff I can put on the aircraft or whatever reasons, and I need to prioritize, maybe thrust vectoring is not the highest one on my list, and maybe, let's say, like even more 100% stable electronic system with pickup ranges of 1,000 miles, and I can see everyone, would be more important than having a thrust vectoring situation, for example, because I never go to then the area where I would need thrust vectoring, for example. So it's also from the pilot heart. Smiling wise, thrust vectoring is always great to have, and there are good reasons to have them in certain situations, but it wouldn't be my personal prior one list, let's say, that is really missing on the Typhoon.
Roger. We've just had our first aeroplane with thrust vectoring added in DCS, which is the JF-17. Now, it doesn't have thrust vector in real life, but they've done it. They're doing it just to test some stuff out for probably another plane that they're going to be bringing, which probably will have thrust vectoring. I'm speculating here, but we can actually now go in a multiplayer environment and try this thrust vectoring out and see how much of a difference it actually makes in DCS. We're going to find that really interesting. Anyway,
the EJ200 engine, there is, from pretty much like from the beginning on of the Typhoon career. Eurojet has a version of the thrust vectoring EJ200 in stock. It is ready. It is there. You could start doing this tomorrow if you would put money in it. It is also the flight. I mean, obviously you have to rework the whole digital flight control system then for this, and this has also been done. There are strakes that extend and make it a much more AOA fighter. They are available and they have test flown. I've seen them. So there's a kit, let's say, for the Typhoon available, where you make it a much more AOA fighter, and even with thrust vectoring, it is available. But no Air Force up to now bought it.
That's interesting.
And that is also some kind of a message.
Yeah, it's actually really, A, I wasn't aware of that, which is great information from you. B, it really shows you, I guess, what I'd call the free market value of that system, because if people haven't bought it, because obviously everything costs money, it really questions if it's actually worth it, isn't it? So, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, anyway, let's push on. Great answers. What sets the Typhoon apart from other fighters in your opinion? I don't know how you're going to answer that.
I think we touched that with all the others.
I thought so. We'll skip that one. Are you flying DCS at the moment, Giro?
Sure.
Okay. What is your favourite plane in DCS and why?
The Typhoon.
That's not
Very-
fair. It has to be someone else's.
I know. That's unfair, but that's obviously true. But it's a luxury just I have right now, and I hope you can have it or soon also. Yeah, I mean, besides that, I must unfortunately say that I don't have so much time flying around
No,
because
of course.
testing that and so on is binding my time. But if not, I always enjoy flying the F-18 and obviously also the F-14, which is my beloved aircraft. So
Okay, very good.
great.
I think at this point it would be a good idea if we skip up back to question 12. We can have a little pop at some of these. I've had a quick blast through, and some you might not be able to answer. If we kind of do some quick fire questions, quick fire answers, and see if we can blast through. This is back from Hoggett. I understand that the Eurofighter was one of the first combat aircraft built mainly using composite materials such as carbon fibre. Does this have any effect, if any, on the environmentals within the cockpit as far as feedback to the pilot is concerned? Can we expect audible feedback from the aircraft in response to high alpha G manoeuvres in the form of rattling or creaking? Can we talk about the real aircraft, how this is relevant?
Especially that last part of the question of rattling and creaking, that's not so much the material question of how it is built. I mean, obviously it is, I'm not even quite sure, but it is a very high percentage, is like something like 80% or so is carbon fiber, which makes it this high thrust to weight ratio fighter. But that it is a very stiff airframe, so there's not much, wing bending or so going on because of that material. So that is a very stiff thing. But it's, on the other hand, it's also a delta wing aircraft, so there's no so much wing banding in a delta aircraft anyways. But it has a very distinctive AOA thing going on, let's say, starting from 10 alphas on. The airframe, like a pilot would say, really starts talking to you because it starts, like every delta wing aircraft, starts to have AOA rumbling, let's say, going through from the wing into the aircraft. And that is very pronounced, even more than I always thought would happen in this kind of electronic jet. It's not really a noise thing, obviously, but it's a feeling. It is. You really start to feel it, and that is something you can. Even though we always in the beginning feared that the aircraft would not talk to you much because it's a complete dead stick, right? I mean, so
Right.
it has no connections. It's a joystick. You don't get any force feedback of it. We always thought it could be a problem, especially during fight, to estimate your energy state and so by just feeling the aircraft. But it is not true. Due to this delta wing geometry, the aircraft, again, from 10 AOA on, really starts giving you a good feedback on that you start losing energy because you're doing so much, you're expecting so much from the wing that is not able to deliver anymore. And you can shape your fight going by just feeling the aircraft, and that is obviously a little bit difficult in DCS then to mimic. So probably need to put in maybe intention of a noise thing to get that feedback because you don't have it normally if you don't have this kind of a rumble mat or something in your seat.
Right. So we need it. We need it from you in sound and vibration. You can give us that, can't you?
Yeah, we definitely will. I mean, the vibration thing is you can recognize it, and it's important and during combat because you don't want to look at an AOA indicator that is not really there or so, and you want to feel the aircraft and feel the kind of energy state you have right now, and that is to transfer this in a simulator is always difficult. So if you have like an equipment that has for these rumble force feedback mats that there are, these little motors that can give you a rumbling seat there, then we want to support this because that makes it much more believable, I'd say.
Yeah, of course. Okay. I hear many pilots in the RAF maintain that the smaller Hawk T2 is more dangerous to fly than many frontline fighters due to its faster onset rate of G. Even though the Eurofighter is highly unstable, do the flight control systems combined with its high drag under relatively low alpha make it predictable when entering high G maneuvers?
It is a completely electronically tailored aircraft, so you can expect from it what you program it, basically. It has I hope I can say this, classified, but I think so. It has something like 15 Gs per second onset, the Eurofighter, depending on the flight situation, obviously. But this is such a high onset that is enough really to catch you, in the wrong moment. There are I trained in Shepard on the T-37. I mean, that is a really old aircraft, and it's like this straight wing aircraft. I'm not sure if you know this even. But this was a G monster, not in high Gs, but you could really have a high fast onset and knock yourself out. Also because you had no G equipment in there. You didn't have any G thrusters or something sitting in it. So you really had to strain, and expect the G onset. So in the Eurofighter, you have high onset rates capable, but you have an excellent anti-G equipment. But still, it could knock you out, and you still need to be prepared, but it goes up to 9 Gs very quickly, and you have your good equipment. So it's always a balance. And a combat pilot, fighter aircraft pilot, really always needs to be aware and trained for these G onsets and do this before they onset to be ready and not afterwards, because it's much tougher to pull out through. So a T2 I've never flown a T2, so that can be very dangerous. And the Eurofighter can be as well as dangerous. You need, as this kind of fighter pilot, be prepared for the stuff you're doing there.
Right. Do you think the T-37 had a high onset because of its straight wing, or is it going to be more complex?
Yeah, it's very. I mean, the T-37 was like a regular, like a civilian type aircraft with a straight wing, it's not correct if I say this now, but it's like a Cessna with a lot of power, and if you pull a lot of Gs, then you have a high onset, right? So it has really a high onset rate. Surprisingly, for this kind of aircraft, I never thought so. And you didn't have any G protection, so that was a bad combo, but also a good combo to train on and make you aware, because you want to be a fighter pilot, so be aware of this.
Okay, very good. What is the highest and fastest you've ever flown in your career? What is common for pilots to approach or even exceed the maximum? Was it common for pilots to approach or even exceed the maximum operating parameters on either the Phantom or the Typhoon?
No, the last part is really stupid, because you break the aircraft, and so that's something you shouldn't do. So operate outside the parameters of the aircraft, intentionally, let's say, at least. If you do it unintentionally, then that can happen, but you shouldn't do this intentionally. And the highest and fastest. So the highest, to be honest, in the Eurofighter is something like 50,000 feet and speed 1.8. So I've never flown faster than Mach 2. A lot of Phantom pilots who had the luxury, let's say, of being also we had these, it's like a mini test pilot thing, like an industry thing, who, if the engine, for example, was changed of the aircraft, you need to do a little test flight. If everything is installed correctly again. If you had this license in this profile, for example, you were required to go Mach 2, for example, in the Phantom. So if you were one of these pilots in the squadron who had this license to do, then you regularly flew, for example, Mach 2. But in air combat situations, even also with the Eurofighter, it is not so common that you fly this fast. It is common that and also this high. It's always, again, depending on the situation. The key to success in the Eurofighter is that you accelerate so fast to high speeds. I mean, for the most air-to-air weapons, it is the same situation, that you need to go through the Mach to make it more easy for the missile to be high, to have longer ranges for the missile, right? So it's a good thing to be able to push very quickly to a medium high speed, let's say something like 1.5-ish or so. And if you can reach that quickly, which the Typhoon does brilliantly, then that is a capability. But you don't need to go really Mach 2 or something, right? But it makes if you understand what I mean. So it's not necessarily so needed to fly around all day in Mach 2 or so, right? So it's nothing that so often happens.
Of course, yeah. Right, very good. What is the attitude of the Luftwaffe towards training rule violations in terms of pilots who broke the rules in order to gain advantage, be it flying below the hard deck or turning inside another aircraft bubble? I ask as a Rafale recently started a small fire in the south of France by flying 80 feet and cutting power lines. Although this is well below the allowed minimum altitude for low flying, it seems somewhat unexpected. It seems somewhat expected for French pilots to take an attitude towards the roles.
No, that's bullshit. I think, at least as far as I know. I mean, I know situations where pilots in every Air Force do stupid stuff and bend the rules and exceed the rules and so on, but it's never really tolerated or a good idea. Normally, only bad things come from it. It doesn't make your training probably better. It increases your risk of dying or hurting someone or something or so, like this fire situation there, for example. So that doesn't make sense. If you need, for example, to train to fly in 80 feet, then at least today, I mean, I would strongly have a discussion on, do you really need this? And if you need this, like we did in the Phantom in the 90s, we went to Goose Bay, Canada, and flew in 100 feet all day, and it was big fun. For the pilot, again, it's a fun thing to do, not so much for the visual. And so then you train this, but you train this in an environment and an area where this is regulated for and good to do. And you don't do this at your home and flying over your house in 80 feet. So that is not what you expect. And it's also, I mean, the question of the bubble thing is like we talked about earlier. That is something that keeps the guys in training alive. If you don't honor this, the chance of hitting the other guy and yourself and be dead is so much higher. That's why they invented this bubble thing. And depending on the aircraft, again, it is you have a 500-foot bubble or a 1,000-foot bubble or so. That depends on your airframe and the capabilities. But you have a bubble, not to go like DCS. If I hit you, who cares? You know? So that is why there are rules out there. The rules are to be able to come back later and train again and fight again. Obviously, during a real combat situation, you can always go train as you fight situation, but you want to be able to train again and train again. In a real combat situation, obviously you don't care about the bubble thing, but you still don't want to hit the guy and take him out, but be dead also, right? That doesn't make sense too. So all these rules make sense for good reasons, and there's, at least in Germany, no good reason to do this intentionally and say, I violate the rules. That is never good. Never.
Okay. The next one is, the Luftwaffe is looking to continue operating a high-low mix with its aircraft, such as Tornadoes, are being replaced with the EA-18Gs. How do you think this will change the wider doctrine of the Luftwaffe, as the high-low composition now seems to be split between aircraft with advanced sensors and aircraft that are more capable as weapon platforms? Any answer to that?
Yeah, the platform is you buy and you build in your country is depending on what are your needs. And so the Tornado had a special purpose for its role, right? And then obviously Phantom pilots and everybody else made fun that the aircraft is not flying very high and cannot do this, but it had a very good thing that it does lower altitude and had its purpose, right? Like you said, also with the Eurofighter, now the purpose of the Eurofighter is flying high, fast, and being an interceptor. And now you could, on the other hand, go vice versa and say, but if you fly with the Eurofighter or the Typhoon in low altitude, it's not really built for it, and it uses too much gas for it, for example. The engines are not optimized to fly in low altitude all day. With the Eurofighter, that's not a good idea. So every aircraft has its purpose. So, and this decision is depending then on what's your political, idea of who's the enemy, what's the threat, what kind of systems and weapons do we need to counter that, and that should drive normally what your equipment is. And so, if you think Tornado systems and when they were started to be designed and what was the world at that time, and then you fly these systems for like 30, 40 years, then obviously, like we can observe, political things change. And then all of a sudden you notice after like 10, 20 years that your frame is not anymore the right one and you need something different. And hopefully then the politicians say, okay, you get a new one and not in 40 years. In Germany, it took like 40, 50 years, and we tend to fly these things a long time. Yeah, but as you can see in the States, if you put more money in it, you can start adjusting to what is the threat, who's the enemy, right?
Watch out. I'm going to skip a couple down to number 8. I understand that the Capital E radar introduced on later tranches of the Eurofighter incorporates a similar design to the Vixen radar on the Saab Gripen and offers extreme off-boresight capability due to its rotating gimbal as opposed to traditional mechanical scan. How does this influence its operation in BVR, as angle of offset crank is no longer limited by the radar slew angle? Feel free not to answer this one because obviously you might not be able to, but anything of interest there that you can talk about?
Yeah, that is really touching now, classified stuff. But let's say, I mean, obviously, the Eurofighter company is promoting the aircraft, and you can see in the open world, non-classified world, you can see how the radar, the Captor E, is designed and what the general purpose and idea of it is. So it is true that there is the idea of having this to have higher look angles, which is perfect. To be very honest, if I would have designed an aircraft, I would have always tried to put in radars around it to make it like more like an AVEX all-around bubble thing and have complete situational awareness of completely around me to my back and whatever. That would be perfect. But conventional designs having just this radar dish on the front had its disadvantages. And so now the dish goes more than, has more look angle. That is good. And that will definitely influence how you operate the aircraft. Makes completely sense. But into this detail, I cannot go.
So just to be sure, we can't answer the question what the maximum azimuth scan angle is.
I'm not sure if that is how much that is in the non-classified world. I have no idea. If you see graphics, and you can probably look at it in the internet.
Yeah. Okay, I'll leave that one for now. Then that's fine. It isn't actually a really interesting question. I've never thought about it before. All the other aircraft, we're limited to what, 70, I think, maximum. 60 on some of them. Should be interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty much the classic angle. Yeah.
Okay, I once heard a story of Belgium air component Mirage 5 practicing BFM with an RAF FGR-2, and both ended up at 50 feet in full afterburner down in the middle of a street. When the German authorities questioned the pilots about the response from the Belgium was something along the lines of, "We're the occupying forces, so we'll fly where we like." Do you have any stories, be it positive or negative, of having to deal with foreign air forces stationed in Germany during the Cold War?
Yeah, that's a good answer from this guy. Yeah, well, Germany really was for a long time not a real sovereign country. It's amazing, and not so many people knew this. Even when I started flying on the Phantom and doing the QRA duty, protecting Germany's airspace in the 90s, if something really serious, let's say, would have emerged, then out of a sudden the Americans would have taken over decision trees, let's say. That was really not amazing, but it was really surprising to me at this time. And I thought, well, I mean, it's Germany, right? I mean, is Germany not ruling the skies in Germany? And it wasn't the case. So that very cocky answer is partly true, even though I wouldn't let it stand like this completely. But yeah, in parts it was true. Still not meaning that he can do whatever he wants. I mean, there are still the rules, like we said before, that he also needed to stick to. And I had a staff tour also in my career in one of the headquarters that was, let's say, dealing with also the flight operations of everyone in the German airspace, meaning also the other air forces operating here. I had this staff tour not in the Cold War times, but in the middle of 2000s. But still, there were a lot of incidents where foreign air forces, let's say, didn't stick to the German rules, and that was still not good. I mean, there were also sometimes these pilots even were banned, let's say, to fly in the German airspace, depending on the severity of what they did. So, I mean, that's the wrong attitude to do in a foreign country anyway. And even if you are like the occupying force, that is still nothing you should do or can do without being punished for it. And especially after the 90s, into the 2000s, then I haven't seen too much, but it sometimes occurred. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's partly true. Yeah.
Roger, Gero. Now, I'm aware that I've had you talking for over an hour and a half now. How are you for time and voice and stuff like that?
I am hydrated. I have a British tea going, so I'm okay. So
okay,
I continue. If you like, if you're interested, we can continue.
Okay. Well, let's see if there's. I've missed a couple out there because they were kind of touching on what we looked at before with the kind of reunification and the pilots. So feel free to answer 6 or 7, but otherwise it seemed like we've been over that.
Shall I read them by myself now and see if I can answer?
Yeah, have a quick read and see what you think.
Okay. Yeah, we touched that definitely. I think we touched them. You're right.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, well, in that case, we're going to blast down to 29, and we should get through these relatively quickly. Was the F4 powerful enough for its size and weight, in your opinion, for its goal, its role, I suppose, is the operative factor?
Since we flew the F4 for so long, in the beginning, I think it was a very good package, let's say. And it was even during the Vietnam era. I think the first, and maybe only, but the very first multi-role aircraft. I mean, it did everything, right? And you could put so many bombs on it, for example. It was amazing to see, and gun pods and whatever. So it really was a workhorse. Later in Germany, then, like, we flew it in the German Air Force as an air-to-air fighter. Then I would say no. I mean, obviously, then you oppose guys with an F-18, F-16, F-15, and then the aircraft, was completely not a good match on this. So you would have desired more powerful engines, for example. But then we had this discussion before. Then the whole layout of the airframe would never have really made the difference, because then it would have been like the F-16. You put more and more engine power in it, but that doesn't help from a certain point on. So. That pretty much answered it, I think.
Roger. Just reading ahead, the next one asks if you've engaged a MiG-29, and you haven't, I know. But maybe you talk about the MiG-29 in general, of what you know about it, and how effective the Luftwaffe pilots were in it, or any comments on the MiG-29?
To be honest, in the very beginning that I flew in the Eurofighter in 2003, then going to 2004, we deployed from the industry to Lage, set the base in 2004. And by that time, we still had the MiG-29 at Lage also. And we did test trials against the MiG-29s with the Eurofighter. So I took part in that. It's not like, I didn't mention that before, it's not like a training thing we did against the F-15 or F-18, but we did trials against the MiG-29s. The problem is that by that time, the Eurofighter software, flight control software, was so early that we had so many restrictions on it that we couldn't do, and we're not allowed even to do real close-in dogfight against any fighter, because that is something you will then also experience in DCS. There is a function because it's a completely unstable aircraft, there's a function in the Eurofighter that keeps you from stalling. You cannot stall the aircraft. The computer will always, at a certain point, take over and take the aircraft control off you and fly into a situation where it doesn't stall again. That is something you really need to train, because if that happens in in a combat situation and the computer flies, that is unpredictable, and you're not fighting your fight anymore. So you need to avoid this. In the beginning, flying in the beginning 2003 and 4, that software was not yet in the aircraft. So technically, we could stall the aircraft, and the Eurofighter doesn't stall. Not because of the airframe. The airframe is unstable and it will not stall. It completely flips over and does funky stuff. So it's unrecoverable if you go under a certain speed. That's why the computer is there. And we didn't have the software in the beginning, and so we were not allowed to do combat against the MiG-29s, because if you stalled kind of the aircraft, it was gone. And so we did trial runs and speed runs and whatever, and a bit of far combat situations, but not like BFM really against them, which was a shame. and then we sold the aircraft, the MiG-29s, to Poland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were, so that was very unfortunate.
Roger. Okay. Now that's a segue.
The pilots of the MiG-29 are good pilots. I mean, I talked about the Eastern pilots from the MiG-29s. They were, let's say, more capable because of the aircraft was also more capable, but they were also a little bit different trained. They were okay, and we took over some of these guys into the Western Air Force, and that was okay.
Roger. In our simulator, we've recently come on to the MiG-29 to see how good it is in dogfighting, and it's a real, when used by a proper pilot, it's a real monster. Yeah.
And the last part of the question is with the Luftwaffe pilots in the seat means the Western Luftwaffe taking over pilots than in the MiG-29, right? That's part of the question. Yeah, and that is, I mean, obviously that was very interesting, a very interesting time, I think, for the other air forces, because then there was a very high demand of the MiG-29 squadron we had to oppose as Red Air against everybody. And that is twice again, unfortunately, we sold them, I think, because the Americans even offered, I know, to deploy the MiG-29 squadron completely over to the red flag area and station it there and pay for it.
Wow.
In total, because we could have stationed the whole German squadron over at whatever that is under the red flag area there. I can't even remember anymore. And they would have paid for the whole thing because you would have had a perfect MiG-29 radar thing going on, right? So, but we didn't. We sold it. So
I had no idea. I know they did it with everything with MiG-29s downwards. They had floggers, they had 21s, they had 15s, they had 17s, they had 19s. I never knew they tried to get 29s. How interesting is that? Okay.
They do.
Yeah. Oh, they do. Right. Okay.
The German ones. They got other ones.
Oh, okay. Very good. And we just touched on this, but is the Typhoon as unstable as they say? And is there really nothing you can do to land safely if there is a flyby, a computer FCS failure? Yes. It's just, what would happen out of interest if you were flying straight and level, the computers went, well, nothing would happen, right? Because you've got no control, because it all goes through the FCS, right?
Yeah, there's no control.
There's nothing.
If for some reason the completely double redundant flight computer quits, then you can eject.
Okay. There's nothing to add to that. You got no direct link. It's as simple as that.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Did the early tranches of the Eurofighter, were they able to perform air to ground? I can't remember.
Theoretically, yes. From the very first version on, we had the capability of putting dump bombs on, and we could have really dropped them, right? That would have worked technically. It wouldn't have really made much sense, but technically that would have worked. But again, the technically yes, but just this one bomb type that we didn't have in stock, by the way. So you would say, in fact, you would say no.
Yeah, in reality, yeah, understood.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is relevant to you as an instructor. If you had to pick one, or the most important quality that you try and teach or cultivate as an instructor, what would that be to a young pilot, if there is such a thing?
There are many qualities a fighter pilot needs. Probably the most important one is attitude.
Right.
That you really need to know what you're doing. That you need to be willing to do this kind of job, and give it more than 100%. Because the whole training, like with every military guy, every soldier, it's pretty much the same situation. But you train to kill a guy and not be killed. That's something our politicians regularly, I think, kind of forget that. And I like to put this in a drastic way to make it better understandable. But we are trained killers. For killers with a good purpose, hopefully, with a task you get that is, for a good reason, but nonetheless, you're still trained to win, and compete against a guy and kill him, right? And if you don't have this attitude on And if you think you can, give 80% and that's fine and just work here, and it's a cool thing to fly over the clouds and do loops to music, and it's fine. That is something you don't need in your squadrons, right? So, and that is something attitude that encompasses much more than I just touched, but yeah, that's pretty much the very first important thing. And from that, you have a basis to build on, right?
Roger. That's interesting. It's just again difference between real life and DCS. You don't that's not a problem for us. Obviously, you don't kill anyone.
Shouldn't. Yeah.
That's interesting. Kind of going off the back of that, as you get further on with your students, and maybe some of them get quite cocky, and I've seen this in kind of television shows with students. They get quite cocky and they think they know better than you and stuff like that. How do you counter that as an instructor?
You show him how it's really done. I mean, this cockiness that's the attitude thing.
Yes.
That doesn't work long. Cockiness is always, that's the bad side of, attitude, the opposite side of the coin, right? Cockiness, if you really meet a real fighter pilot who knows his shit and is a good one, he's not cocky.
Yeah. Roger. Okay, very good. 35. Is German Air Force still believing in close-range dogfights, or is it going to bet on stealth sensors and less capable kinematic jets in the near future?
Yeah, that's a good question and an ongoing thing. Mm-hmm. And we also mentioned this quite some time now. It should depend on what you think is the threat you're facing in the near future. And that makes all your procurement decisions on what you need in your own inventory. If you can define the opponent, and if you can define then the weapon systems that opponent has and would use, that shapes what you need. And if you make it a very broad, in general thing, and you think you can fight everyone on this planet that could be a possible opponent at some point, then you need to be the United States and have in your inventory everything that is on the market and do more. And if you say you put only very minimum amount in this, and then it will be a problem.
Oh, Joe. Right. Next one. It'll be interesting to see what you say to the next one. Does to be a good pilot in an Air Force, do they need natural talent, or will a good discipline and hard work be good enough? I know it's impossible to quantify, but just interested in your opinion.
Yeah, I think it's not an or question. So it's like an and. You need to have talent.
I thought, yeah.
And you need to have discipline and do hard work. Then you can be a good pilot. Good fighter pilot, let's say, at least, right? But I think that's true for every pilot. It should be true for every pilot, but it's if you don't have talent, you can train as much as you want. You might get a decent one, maybe. But if the talent aspect misses out, then that's a problem. And I've seen talented pilots definitely who are not disciplined and didn't hard work, and that didn't help either. That's worse.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I've seen exactly that. I was in the music kind of business, quote unquote, for about 15 years, and exactly the same way. You can be the hardest worker in the world, but if you weren't born with talent, it's no good, and vice versa. You can have the best talent in the world, but if you don't practice and you're not disciplined, it doesn't work either.
Yeah.
Very good. How did you, in the Luftwaffe, guys, relax after a hard day of 9 hours of flying or whatever? How did you chill out?
Everybody does his stuff, what he thinks helps, right? I mean, how can you answer that? You go to your family, hopefully, if you have one. If you don't, you do your stuff. That's you relax like you think you relax. That is completely, I think, individual. What? Yeah. But you get mad. Everybody has his own way of relaxing,
right?
So
you can't just force everyone to go to the Schwimmbad. Everyone's gonna want to do their own thing, basically, right? No,
but maybe if you take this to a broader perspective, if you think, for example, in the combat situation again, in the real combat situation again, I've been lucky not to be in a real one. I mean, I've been to Afghanistan deployed. That comes close to it. But if you then think about how you want to be able to sustain your people, your forces for a longer time, then it is a question of how can you get them from a very high intense environment into a relaxation where they be able to fight again and again and again. So, and for example, in the Luftwaffe, I met like the States, they have these go and no go pills, for example, for their missions, and that is something that has not been introduced never in Germany. Obviously, we didn't have this combat situation, but we did have combat situation. The tornado went to war, right? I mean, Afghanistan is a war situation, so we had enough of this stuff that was going around. But for example, we never, took these guys into like the medical situation of, putting them asleep with a pill and waking them up then through the rest of the day with a pill. That was, for example, nothing really good that came to the minds in Germany to be a good idea. So, for example, but this is also a way of relaxing the guy if you put him down with a pill and see you tomorrow again. So,
the next one, you may have to kind of fantasize a bit to answer it, but if you observe military pilots and how they fly, can you guess which part of the world and which air force they're from? Is there a pattern, different training methods and so on?
I need to understand the question first. So if I see someone flying around, I can judge where he comes from by the style he flies.
Yes. I don't know how you, I don't know, again, I don't know how you quantify that, but is there anything you want to take away from that? Certain air forces that will fly completely differently in your experience?
Yes, definitely. I mean, everybody has his own training philosophy, and but if you, for example, we had one situation in Decimo Manu again, Italy deployed there, and we did some training with the Israeli Air Force, and it's like also in the late 90s or something. And we were very surprised how these guys, they're in a constant war thing, right? I mean, the whole idea in life as the Air Force is like a constant war kind of pacing somehow. And with these guys running around in the squadron and flying the aircraft, let's say like a little bit loosely to initial and the pattern and stuff coming back to the airfield, we were really surprised how, let's say like loose they thought about this. Also, the way they were wearing the uniform and the flight suit and kind of shoes were like, man, you guys look like a ramshackle thing there. It's like strange, right? There's not much discipline in there or so. But if you then knew what they really did, then going to the war situation and doing stuff, you were on the other hand, surprised what came out of it. So I think it's tough to estimate on what somebody is really capable of doing in a different situation where it not really counts. Maybe he's a little bit more loose. So by this time, I would have said I can identify an Israeli pilot because how he flies to initial, he doesn't care about the correct track there, maybe, but that would have been really grossly false and underestimating the capabilities, let's say, of these people.
Yeah.
So, but this is kind of the only situation. I couldn't judge if an Italian or a Dutch or German fighter pilot flies with his aircraft over initial and say, well, you see, that's how the Dutch fly. That's, I think, nothing you can really do.
That was a really good answer, actually. That was interesting. Okay. Very quickly, politics. Why don't you have an aircraft carrier?
Good question. Why don't we have F-14s? Why don't we have an aircraft carrier? I'm annoyed and disappointed too.
Okay.
Or make it a serious answer.
It's all about power. I don't know. It's about power. It's about moving your power abroad. I'm guessing it's something you guys just aren't as interested in doing? Question mark.
Definitely. That's what we also addressed much earlier. That obviously the German political orientation of coming out of this thing they call the Second World War. Makes sense that Germany, never planned on projecting power with a aircraft carrier to the other guys on the world, like being a world police thing or having, like you British guys have, like, much broader colony things going on. Right. So what would we need an aircraft carrier for?
Exactly. So it's just a basic function of how your country operates, and which is opposite to the US, which kind of polices the world, and good or bad, that's all fine. Okay. Right, getting towards the end, what was the most striking thing for you about the Phantom as a fighter?
What was the most striking thing?
Yeah. I guess the either good or bad, what stood out of the Phantom as a fighter?
Yeah, I think we talked about this also. I mean, the Phantom was really, you could feel, and you needed to force it to do what you want, right? I mean, if you wanted to fly a tight turn, then you really had to pull on a stick hardly. You got really in your arm, your muscle in your arm. You knew what you do after the combat. The aircraft was, you always had to tell the aircraft what you really want to do, and put your will over it, and very manly thing there. So that was, I can even remember my very first flight on it, coming from the T-38 training jet to the F-4 Phantom in Holloman at 4,000 feet field elevation, and the way I took off the first time in the Phantom, I was completely something between amazed, scared, and high, because it was such an experience to have this. I don't even know. It was like 20 ton or something jet going down with 100 and something, 80, 90 knots down the runway, and rumbling over the really bad shaped runway there at Holloman, and that was kind of scary. Right? It was really manly. And when you step through the Eurofighter later on, being on a German Autobahn-like runway, and it's so smooth, and so it's unthrilling. So the Phantom was really, it really gave you feedback on that you're sitting in a war machine, in a machine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, our last one, we've already touched on this, but anything else you'd like to speak about? Have you ever experienced any mid-air emergencies?
No. I need to knock on wood, but I mean, I'm not anymore a fighter pilot, really, a real one. So I haven't, but like I said, I've been very close, and that was enough.
Watch
I
out.
mean, I could, it's good enough, let's say.
Being 300 feet upside down in a stall is, I think that's enough for most people, Gear.
It's good enough.
Okay, Gero, we've come to the end. So first of all, thank you very much. I've had you talking there for over 2 hours solidly, and I would be in bed exhausted by now. So well done. You're much fitter than I am. That really good answers. Really well done. Really. So a massive thank, and you're a really nice guy as well, which makes it so much better. So many nice guys in this sphere of what we do. It's why I'm still doing it, basically. So it's great to talk to you. I would like to, the only other thing is, down the line, obviously, when you're closer to release on the Typhoon, I'd love to have another chat to you. But otherwise, that's been really good. Anything from you, I guess, before we sign off?
No, I thank you very much from my side to have me again on your channel. And I also would love to do this again, depending on the situation, and if you want to have me on there. So I'm all up for this. And yeah, thanks for having me here. And I'm a happy guy now.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much again, and I'll see you in whenever, years, months, whatever, however long it takes. Take care for now, Gero.
Thank you. Take care too. Stay healthy.
You too.